Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Code. Today, I'm deeply honored to host the Honourable Yves Fortier, a prominent Canadian lawyer, diplomat, former ambassador to the United Nations, and one of the best, if not the best arbitrator, at least in my book. Throughout a distinguished career, Yves Fortier has emphasized honesty, transparency, and his own personal touch. Today, we will begin with Yves' long career, delve into international news, starting with the conflict in Gaza, with an angle on international diplomacy, and then we'll touch on the legacy of the late Brian Morrone, former Prime Minister of Canada, but also a great friend of yours, Yves. With your extensive career in international law and your numerous involvements in high-profile cases and diplomatic negotiations, I'm really very excited to host you today, and I'm deeply honored that you've accepted my invitation.
Well, thank you for that generous introduction, Patrice. It's a privilege and a pleasure to be here, sitting next to one of my former mentees, as I recall.
And still current, I hope.
With pleasure.
So, Yves, preparing for this podcast, I think the hardest part was to focus on you have such a deep and very rich career, and it was to focus on, we only have about 45 minutes, on focus on essential things. So let's get started with your academic background, going back a few years.
Many years.
So you had degrees from McGill University.
Yes.
In Oxford. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. Well, first of all, I went to Collège Sainte-Marie, one of the Jesuit institutions in Montreal. I did my cours classique, with a great deal of Latin, a great deal of Greek, some maths, and all taught by Jesuits. Those were 8 very, I would say, very formative years. I always wanted, Patrice, to become a lawyer, and I wanted to go with many of my friends to l'Université de Montréal. But my father encouraged me to go to McGill, and I said in French, of course, I said, Papa, I don't think I speak English well enough to go to McGill, and my dad, who was a very, very wise person, very wise man, said, Yves, your colleagues at McGill have never studied law in English any more than you have, so you'll learn with them. So I went to McGill,
and you must have been one of the few francophones in the class.
At that time, there were very few of us. You're absolutely right, but I'm in retrospect, I'm glad I followed my father's advice, because this is where I met Carol, who became, we eventually accepted my, well, that's not quite true. She asked me to marry her, and I accepted. But anyway, I did my law at McGill, and I then was encouraged by, in fact, by my future father-in-law. I thought he wanted to get rid of me. I applied for a Rhodes Scholarship, and lo and behold, to my very pleasant and exciting surprise, I was awarded a Rhodes. So I went to Oxford for 2 years, and I studied more law. I thought it would be a good idea for me. I'd studied civil law, of course, at McGill, to get a degree in common law, and I did torts and criminal law and contracts. And it was a very stimulating atmosphere. I could give you names that will probably resonate with you. Some of my teachers, my professors, my tutors at McGill, John Tritle, John Morris, Rupert Cross, real celebrities in the world of law. I thought I died and gone to heaven, really. Anyway, those were 2 very wonderful and enriching years. My first year, when I left, Carol and I became engaged. I wanted to make sure that.
So you were engaged before going to Oxford.
I was.
Okay,
so we were engaged before going to Oxford.
Yeah. It's like going to war. You get married before going to war.
Well, right? I wanted to make sure that she didn't do anything foolish while I was away.
And obviously she didn't.
Obviously she did. In fact, it came as a surprise to our children. When we exchanged, though this was many years before the internet, we exchanged letters every day. Every day, she wrote me, I wrote her. I remember in one of my letters, I said how I missed her green eyes, and I got a phone call saying, "What do you mean green eyes? I have blue eyes." I said, "Oh my goodness! how could I? How could I have forgotten?" But anyway, I had 1 year living in college. I'll never forget that year because it's pretty cold during the fall and during the winter in Oxford, and to go to the shower, I had to walk outside probably 50 meters or so, and go have my shower, and then come back to my room, wrapped in a few blankets and ready for a good night's sleep. And then, my dear Papa passed away after my third month, I guess, at Oxford. So I came back for. In fact, I saw him before he died, but then attended the funeral, and returned to Oxford, and then in June returned to Montreal. I had already been, how would I put it, in hockey terms, been signed up by what was then Common Howard Cade Ogilvy,
okay.
Large. In fact, it was then known as the largest law firm in the Commonwealth.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
okay. In Montreal.
In Montreal, Common Howard became Ogilvy Renault, and today Norton Rose. Anyway, I articled during the summer. They paid me the compliment of saying, we'd like to have you join us when you return from Oxford. And but then I had to do a second year. I convinced the Rhodes, although Rhodes scholars were not supposed to be married, and in fact we were not allowed, not supposed, we were not allowed to be married. But I thought in 1959 that this was a condition which the Rhodes trustees should do away with. I pleaded my case, Patrice. I won and they allowed me to return and keep my scholarship for the second year.
And keep your marriage.
And keep the marriage, yes. And we were blessed with the birth of our first child at the Radcliffe Infirmary in Oxford, some 9 or 10 months after we'd arrived. So I got the best of both worlds. 1 year as a bachelor, and 1 year as a married scholar. And I made a lot of friends, Patrice. I made a lot of friends. We lived on a street. This may be of interest to you. We lived on a street, Leckford Road, where a few years later, somebody called Bill Clinton, who was also a Rhodes, came, and we have since exchanged messages about Leckford Road, and I consider myself privileged to be able to say, oh yes, Bill Clinton and I lived on the same street, and
you've stayed in touch.
And we've stayed in touch. Yes, we have.
Let's shift a little bit. forward to your extensive career in international law, Yves, you served as president of the London Court of International Arbitration and also chairman of Alcan, which was now Rio Tinto, a large aluminum manufacturer. Can you talk to us about this experience, the arbitration experience, and also as chairman of Alcan?
Yes. The practice of the law was paramount for me. But I also believed, and I still do to this day at my advanced age, I always thought that to be a good lawyer, you needed to have facets on much that life has to offer. And I was privileged to be invited to join the boards of a few large companies, and this made me, I believe, attuned to there's more to life than just the practice of the law. But as I said, paramount is, for me, always has been, the practice of the law. But with these new vistas, as director of the Royal Bank, for example, of Alcan, which you mentioned, Nortel, Manulife, this gave me an opportunity to learn that there's more to the practice of the law than just the law. And it gave me vistas which I could never have approached if I had not been invited and accepted to serve as director. And I was I was asked to become governor of Hudson's Bay Company. I was.
What's a governor? Is it the equivalent of a director?
It's the equivalent of a director. Yes, and I'm very proud of that appointment, because I was the first Québécois to be appointed as governor of Hudson's Bay Company and chairman of Alcan. And when Alcan was taken over by Rio Tinto, I was invited to serve on the board of Rio Tinto for a few years until I reached the mandatory age of retirement, which I've never believed in, but that's another story for another day.
So that probably the expansion of your implications outside of the practice of law would it be fair to say that also opened not just your eyes and your mind, but the minds of others to other roles that you were brought to hold? You were counsel before the International Court of Justice at The Hague in the Canada-U.S. Gulf of Maine maritime boundary case in 1984. You also argued before the Ad hoc International Tribunal, which was constituted to determine the maritime boundary between Canada and France in the North Atlantic in 1991. I mean, those are huge, huge cases. And from July 1988 until January 1992, so for about 4 years, you took leave from your law practice and you became Canada's ambassador and permanent representative to the United Nations in New York. So you lived in New York for that time.
Yeah, in the Big Apple for 4 years.
Then during your term, I'm not done. I mean, your resume is just astounding.
Flattery, Patrice, will get you everywhere.
I know, that's why I'm here, and that's why you're next to me. During your term at the UN, you were Canada's chief delegate to the 43rd to the 46th sessions of the UN General Assembly. In September 1990, you were elected vice president of 45th General Assembly of the UN. And from 89 to 90, you served as Canada's representative on the Security Council of the United Nations. And in 1989, you were actually president of the Security Council. What can you, I mean, I know there's some things you can't tell us about, but I mean, that's astounding. Can you what can you tell us about that experience?
The those were the golden years of the UN, Patrice, and I was privileged to be in a front row seat during those years. Often, when I was in New York, I would be invited to come to various functions in Canada, and one of my favorite refrain was that when the then Prime Minister, my friend Brian Morrone, offered me the position, he wanted, as he said to me at the time, Canada was vying for a seat on the Security Council, and we had a good chance of being elected. And in fact, I open a parenthesis, a very important one. Canada got the most votes which any other member of the United Nations ever received, which was a candidate for a seat on the Security Council. This was 1988.
And just to put in perspective for our listeners, because they may not be aware of the intricate mechanisms of Security Council. Security Council is made up of 5 permanent members.
That is correct.
After the Cold War, and there are some elected members as well that rotate.
Which rotate. That is correct.
Okay, but rotate, but are elected. So you actually
are elected by all member states.
Right.
And it's as you can imagine. I mean, the supreme organ of the United Nations is the Security Council. So it's a much sought after seat, and countries spend a lot of time and a lot of money being candidates for a seat on the Security Council. And at that time, the Prime Minister of Canada was Brian Morrone, and he was a world leader in every sense of the word, and he wanted Canada to be on the Security Council, and he, as only he could do, contacted all of his friends, Prime Minister of this, President of that, around the world. In New York, I rang a few doorbells to plead Canada's candidacy, and when the votes were counted at the end of October 1988, as I mentioned, Canada had the most votes that any country has ever had, which was vying for a seat on the council. I remember at the time, when you're appointed as an ambassador, you have to give your credentials, to present your credentials to the Prime Minister or the President. In the case of the UN, it was to the Secretary General, and at that time, the Secretary General was Pérez de Cuellar, a well-known Peruvian diplomat, fluent in many languages, including French, which was our language of communication. And after you've presented your credentials, you're invited for a tête-à-tête with the Secretary General in his magnificent office on the 38th floor of the UN building in New York. And during that tête-à-tête, the Secretary General said, Mr. Ambassador, this was still in the days when I was called Mr. Ambassador. I had to look behind me to see who was there. And he said, when I want to serve a country as an example of how it should behave, it should conduct itself as a member of the UN, I serve Canada as an example. And I walked back to my mission on cloud 9, thinking that, and then I said, well, he probably says this to every new ambassador. But no, I realized when the votes were counted that this was real, this was true. Canada had an unbelievable reputation at that time, and it was a privilege, as you can imagine, for me to be seated in dans cette loge, in that box. You know, when I came back, following on your introduction, your question, when I came back from the UN, you know, I had about, under my belt, I had about 30 years of practice as a litigation lawyer. I think you would relate to that. That is, to me, a real lawyer is a litigator. And I wasn't too keen on going back to arguing cases before the Superior Court, before the Court of Appeal, or occasionally before the Supreme Court of Canada. And I said, I thought, well, becoming a judge, if the Prime Minister had not written it in his memoirs, I would not say it, I assure you, but he did write in his memoir that he offered me a seat on the Supreme Court of Canada. Needless to say, I was flattered, honored, touched, and but this was not in my DNA to be living professionally with 8 other persons whom I had not chosen in Ottawa to boot.
Right.
So.
Yeah, because you're close to your family also. I think that's also important.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. But so I thought, why not try arbitration? Yves, you want to be an adjudicator, not a judge. And I contacted my law firm at the time, had an office in London. And London, of course, is where, you know, within the magic circle, law firms, they control a lot of the significant arbitrations. So I phoned Andrew Fleming, who was our partner in London. I said, could you arrange for some meetings with lawyers who serve as arbitrators at the moment at Freshfields, at Clifford Chance, at Allen and Overy, etc. And he did, and I went to London. My first meeting, that is, was with the 2 senior lawyers at Freshfields called Martin Hunter and Alan Redfern. And if you're, which you are, familiar with arbitration, you know that they are the giants. I thought I had died and gone to heaven, meeting with Martin and Alan, who became very good friends of mine.
And they probably thought from their side that they had died and gone to heaven. Well, they were sitting with the UN ambassador of Canada to the UN. So I think you're very modest in your assumption. I think you were probably at least same level.
Well, whether or not I was,
yeah.
When I got back to my hotel that evening, Andrew called me and said, Yves, you must have made quite an impression because Alan Redfern would like to put your name on a short list of chairs for the tribunal, which is the ICC tribunal, which is hearing the cost overrun for the building of the channel under the channel under the channel.
The tunnel under the channel.
The tunnel under the channel. I had nothing to do. I had just come back from New York. I had nothing on my agenda. So I said yes. He may put my name on a short list. And the following day, he rang me and said, Yves, the short list has become very short. Would you accept to serve as chair of that ICC tribunal? And he said, but it's a fast-track tribunal. You'll have to proceed with the hearing and issue the sentence, the award, within 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then that was a multi-billion-dollar
case. It was a large case.
Yeah.
It was a large arbitration. Anyway, I of course I accepted the invitation.
And that was a 3-member panel?
3-member panel, yes.
Right.
Bob McQuindle was one of my co-arbitrators, and former bâtonnier whose name escapes me at the moment.
Mm.
I was very wise because I picked up picked up my phone and I rang my young partner Pierre Bienvenu, and I said, Pierre, I'd like you to serve as secretary of this tribunal, and the rest is history. Pierre has done, as you know, is a 5-star arbitrator today. And we delivered our award within the 6 months period that had been imposed. But I want to comment because it's part of my many wonderful memories of where arbitration can lead. The bâtonnier Bondoux, okay, I've got his name now.
Bâtonnier from France?
From France, yes.
Okay.
He was on the tribunal with me, and he had an office with a terrace on Les Champs-Élysées, and we were sitting in the early fall, and on the terrace in the evening, he would invite us for dinner. To my right, I had the Arc de Triomphe, and to my left, I had the Place de la Concorde. And here I was, literally on top of the world.
Yeah.
Yes, arbitration can open many doors. I never regretted turning down the Prime Minister's invitation to go on the Supreme Court, because, as I've said to many of my friends who have gone on to have distinguished careers as judges, being an arbitrator, especially an international arbitrator, you have all the advantages of a judge and none of the disadvantages.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yves, before we talk about Gaza, and so shooting forward in history to today, I just want to reflect back on what you just said about Canada's role at the UN on the Security Council. And I know that Canada over the past 10 or 15 years has tried to reclaim a seat unsuccessfully.
The last 20 years.
Last 20 years, thank you. What's your view on that? Where have we lost track? I understand you referred very aptly to Brian Morrone being a great international campaigner, not just local, but international campaigner, and that's probably what led to, in part, to and your own campaigning, of course, for Canada getting a seat on the Security Council. But what can Canada do to reclaim that space? And how have we lost it?
Well, it's a very good question, Patrice. This, first and foremost, it depends on the presence and the program, if you wish, of the Prime Minister of the day. For example, Stephen Harper, just to name him, was an otherwise good prime minister, but he had very little interest in the United Nations. That's well known. So, Canada's candidacy was doomed to fail under his tutelage, under his term. There are other prime ministers who also had other interests, but you cannot invent just for the moment your country's participation in the United Nations. Thanks to Mr. Pearson, we're known as the inventors of the Blue Berets, these peacekeeping force of the UN.
Going back to the Suez crisis.
Exactly, going back to the Suez crisis, and for many years, Canada had more members of peacekeeping operations than any other country in the world. So when you stood up and said, would you consider voting for Canada? you could say, look, here's our record. Here's what we did yesterday. Here's what we're doing today as full members of the UN. Remember what I told you about Beres de Cuellar saying, serving Canada as the example of what a country should do. But today, we have the lowest participation in peacekeeping forces. So our candidacy is somewhat, every 10 years or so, is not backed up by the same experience, by the same
backbone.
Same backbone.
Yeah.
Okay. Vote for Canada because we are engaged as full participants in the United Nations. Really, what are you doing today? Where's your presence on in the peacekeeping forces? What are you doing with respect to the refugee crisis today? Mm-hmm. What are you doing with respect to for the children of the world, the women, and so on and so forth? So you can't make that up. It's got to be backed up by participation and engagement.
Mm.
Yeah,
interesting. Do you see anything? I mean, I think in my perception, les casques bleus, the blue berets, that's how you call it in English.
Or in French.
Or in French, les
casques bleus.
Les casques bleus. Right. I think that was a great idea, yes. Groundbreaking idea, but it's been about 75 years now. It's been a long time, almost 75 years.
Yes, since the Suez crisis. But here was, Lester Pearson became, as you know, one of our most distinguished foreign secretary, most distinguished prime minister, and he believed that Canada had a role to play on the international stage. Again, I had the very, very significant privilege of meeting Mr. Pearson when I was at McGill with a dear friend of mine at the time who's no longer with us, Pierre Lamontagne. We organized a conference. It was called MICWA, the McGill Conference on World Affairs, and this was just after the Suez crisis, and we invited Mr. Pearson. We pulled a few strings here, a few strings there, and we invited Mr. Pearson to come and speak to the MICWA conference at McGill in 1956 or so. And he came, and he accepted our invitation. And this was
1956. That was at the time of the Suez. Was it?
This is the year. Yes,
those were the years. Yeah.
This was when immediately before, or immediately after the Suez crisis, and Mr. Pearson came to the conference, and I was privileged to meet him, speak to him, and he was a very impressive man. Very impressive man.
I just want to continue on this thread where would you, in your opinion, would you think? I mean, at the time, and until probably the past 20 years, the world order was pretty much bipolar. Mm-hmm. Now it's very multilateral. Mm-hmm. It's much more complex. Would it be fair to say that it's more difficult for a country like Canada to establish leadership in a very confusing political world where nations, we're not talking about alignment or non-alignment, we're just talking about alliances that are multi-level. I see you agree on that. Then I'm going to go straight to the next question. if you were to provide diplomatic advice to Canada, what would be the low-hanging fruits to establish a renewed leadership on the world stage at this time?
Well, first of all, Patrice, I agree with your premise. There are many more countries in the world today which are vying for a place on the world stage. Some of them are punching above their weight. Some of them are punching below their weight. But unquestionably, Canada in 2024 has to compete in a polite sense of the word, of course, with members of the BRIC countries, for example, with the other members of the Commonwealth, of La Francophonie. There are more Canadas today than there were yesterday. That is true, but that doesn't mean, in my humble estimation, that doesn't mean that Canada needs to be a sheep, a mouton.
Mm-hmm.
There are still opportunities for avenues that present themselves for Canada to assert leadership, and this is what I would like to see today. I'd like to see more situations, more where Canada is a leader rather than just a follower.
Mm-hmm. Let's jump to Gaza right now, and maybe you have some views on this. Recently, on March 24th, the UN Security Council adopted a resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza between Israel and Palestinian militants Hamas, the terrorists. We can call them terrorists, of course. Mm-hmm. The United States abstained to vote. The resolution emphasizes the urgent need to expand the flow of humanitarian assistance to and reinforce the protection of civilians in the entire Gaza Strip, and reiterates its demand for the lifting of all barriers to the provision of a humanitarian assistance at scale. The resolution also demands the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. Of course, this resolution is non-binding. What exactly, in your view, can the UN bring not only to this conflict resolution, but to conflict resolution in general?
Well, first of all, this is a dispute. This is which has been going on for literally 100 years. The Balfour Declaration dates back to 1919, I believe. And if ever there was a dispute in the world which called for which called for a solution. A solution. This is it. The dispute between Israel today and the Palestinians, you have extremists on both sides of the divide today. The Hamas is a terrorist organization. Israel today is led by Netanyahu and other far right politicians, and neither one of them is going to succeed in reaching a two sovereign state solution, which has to be the objective, and it's I believe that the Hamas has succeeded in what it pursued on October the 7th. It was what it did to that kibbutz in Israel I don't have words to define it, but it was hoping for an overreaction on the part of Israel, and it has come. And the overreaction means, notwithstanding all the attempts by the Qatari and the Egyptians and the Americans, there has been no real solution. The abstention of the United States when in the Security Council resolution on last Friday, was a welcome development in my view. It was long overdue. The United States cannot simply be an unqualified supporter of Israel. Much as President Biden would like to, would not wish to antagonize the Jewish population and the diaspora. He has to face up to the fact that Israel has gone further than it should have gone. And in trying to reach, what it has done to the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip is beyond words, as far as I'm concerned. So there needs to be yet another yes, I will say, another Arafat who would accept, to shake hands with the Prime Minister or the President of Israel, as he did after the Oslo Accord some years ago. There was a little bright spot on the Middle East, in the Middle East at the time of the Oslo Accord, but then Rabin was murdered, and it was back to square one. But there is I hope and pray that there will be tomorrow morning a diplomat or a group of diplomats which will accept to face up to the fact that the Middle East cannot continue in the situation in which it is today. You need to have a ceasefire. You need to have a release of the hostages, and but that's asking for a lot of goodwill at a time when there's very little goodwill, regretfully.
Very complex situation, and thank you for providing your light on this, Yves. So has the UN reached the extent of its influence over this? So is the ball in the court of individual players now, or a coalition of players, or can the UN go further?
I agree with I think it was Lester Pearson who said it, that if the UN did not exist, it would need to be invented.
Mm-hmm.
It is a forum, and I've lived it for 4 years. It is a forum where states engage in conversations, states engage in diplomacy, states engage in mediation, states engage in arbitration. And yes, Patrice, I believe that there is a role for the UN, and it's not like the League of Nations, which for lack of support by Germany in particular at the time was disappeared from the scene. So the UN is a forum that should be preserved. The UN is a forum that should be used, and it's one may think that at the level of ambassadors, there is little that can be accomplished. But I was surprised to see how some of my exchanges, for example, when I was there, some of my exchanges with my colleagues turned out to reach higher in the political atmosphere of each individual country. Oh yes, yes, yes. I remember Ambassador so and so saying such and such to Ambassador so and so, and it got to his capital, and at the in the capital, it inched its way to the premier or the prime minister, and there were positive developments. As you know, Patrice, I believe in mediation. I believe in speaking. I believe in talking. I think, as you can tell at the moment, and I think it's absolutely vital to keep this forum alive. And this was I'm a disciple of Brian Morrone. Brian believed in the United Nations, and he was proven right then, and today we need more energy.
Let's talk about Brian Morrone. Yves, first of all, I want to express my most sincere condolences for the passing of your friend, longtime friend, Brian Morrone, just a few weeks ago, just 2 weeks ago. Who is affectionately called the Washington Whisperer.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, first of all, thank you for your condolences. I did lose a dear friend, although we were not of the same political ilk. That never stood in the way of our friendship. You know, he was a little bit more of a conservative than I was. But from day one, when I met him about 60 years ago, we struck a friendship which lasted. And speaking of political ills, I remember after New York being with him in Ottawa, and generously said, "Oh, you did a good job at the UN." I said, "Well, the moral, Brian, is if you want Canada to be well represented on the world stage, appoint Liberals." And well,
you must have laughed at that.
We had a good laugh, but Brian was believed in personal diplomacy. I often said, you know, if he could have met every Canadian one-on-one, he would have been Prime Minister for life. Because when he spoke to you, he very much like, I mentioned Bill Clinton earlier, very much like Bill Clinton, he only had eyes for you. You were the only important person in the room. And although he may have kissed the Blarney Stone a little too much occasionally, he appeared very sincere, and he was very sincere. He never forgot where he came from. Bécomo, as is well known by now, he's
from a blue collar family.
From a very his father was an electrician in Bécomo, and he put Bécomo on the map. In fact, I guess you could say that, and he he was he was a he was a he was a true believer of the importance of being honest with those that you deal with. He didn't think of himself as being a Superman. I remember at the time of the first Gulf crisis, when Canada was on the Security Council at the time.
In 91?
Yeah. And no, in 89, the first Gulf.
Okay. Thank you.
89. And President Bush invited Prime Minister Mulroney to come to the White House. And Brian asked me very generously if I could go with him, which I did. And to this day, I remember one of those Canadian journalists saying, Mr. Prime Minister, what are you doing here? And I can still hear President Bush saying, Brian, let me answer that question. And President Bush said, I invited Prime Minister Mulroney to come to Washington. I wanted to consult with him. I value his judgment, and I respect him. And next question. And this was his way of saying, I have a friend, a colleague, and I want his advice. And Brian was always ready to give advice. And there was another occasion when Brian Mulroney could have become Secretary General of the United Nations if he had wanted to. The 5 permanent members, of course, influenced the choice of the Secretary General. He had met and become friend with Mikhail Gorbachev. He was a very good friend of President Bush at the time. He was a friend of President Mitterrand, and he was a friend of Madame Thatcher. I told him one day, Brian, there's a lot of support here for should you be interested, for you becoming the next Secretary General. And he said, Yves, I've thought about it. This was at a time when the Conservative Party was very low at the bottom of the polls.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I can't. I'm very emotional when I remember that. He said, I can't do that to my party. I can't. This is not the time for me to leave a ship that is sinking. Well, this was the Brian Morrone that I got to know extremely well during those 60 years that we were friends.
And he shepherded Canada into many groundbreaking alliances. Can you tell us a little bit? And you were part of that, I think, NAFTA and others. Can you tell us about your perspective? You were very close to the Canadian government at the time.
Yeah, speaking as a Québécois, his involvement of his activity within the francophonie was extremely rewarding. He was responsible for Quebec becoming a member of la francophonie, and he always, as his daughter said at his funeral, il avait le Québec dans la peau. He had Quebec under his skin,
mm-hmm.
And he believed that Quebec had a place had a role to play, not just as a province of Canada, but as a distinct society. I don't want to enter into a political debate with you today, Patrice, but
it's been adopted by Parliament now. It's been recognized.
It has. Quebec is a nation.
Right.
Absolutely. But you could be, and he's a perfect example. You could be a committed Quebecois and a committed Canadian at the same time. There's no dichotomy with that with those two vocations.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, NAFTA. One of his favorite comments was, "You don't go for a home run every day, but if at the end of the season, at the end of your season, if you've had a few home runs at a Babe Ruth or at a Mickey Mantle, it's been a good season." He preached what he believed in, and he was sincere in what he believed in, and he was a great prime minister.
When he approached you and offered you the ambassadorship to the UN for Canada, did you feel imposter syndrome?
Did I feel it?
Imposter syndrome. Can you tell us what was in your mind when you received this? And
well, again, being very candid, Brian very generously had offered me a few other positions before New York, and I'm very much in his debt. He I remember as if it was yesterday, Patrice, when I got the call in May or June of 1988, and he said, "Yves, I think I may have something that would interest you to offer. He says, come to Sussex." So I went to Ottawa and said, New York, possible seat on the Security Council. I'd like to have a friend on the Security Council during those years, and I thought that you would be that friend. I remember thinking, New York, an hour's flight from Montreal, and Carol being able to go to Bergdorf or Saks, or this was an offer that I could not refuse, and I felt very, very privileged that he would consider me for to sit in Canada's seat at the United Nations, and I never regretted it. It was a wonderful. Those were 4 wonderful years, and I thank my friend for having made it possible.
To those listeners who are being offered, let's call it a promotion or an opportunity that is outside of their comfort zone. Yeah. Obviously, it was probably outside of your comfort zone. Absolutely. At the beginning. What advice would you give those people? What was in your mind at the time, and what brought you to accept that?
That's a very penetrating question, Patrick, and it describes very well what I went through during that. Let me think about it process. You must never close the door to an opportunity, to a journey which may not be what you had envisaged when you started your career. There are doors which will present themselves that you never expected, would be before you. Don't hesitate to step into this other world. It's because life is so short, unfortunately, and there is so much that needs to be done that you want to do, and if you're afforded an opportunity of doing something different, say, I'll say yes, I sir, and it's very crucial, very important to dare.
Mm.
That's the way I would phrase it.
Yves, that's the time we have. Thank you so much. And I wanted to ask you at the end if you had any additional wise words, but those were just amazing. Those were amazing wise words. Thank you.
Be ready. Be ready to be ready.
And I think if I can venture into that as well, if someone sees in you a potential and goes to the extent to offer you something, I think that it's a privilege to be able to consider it and then to accept it and not have the self-doubt.
Don't be
overcome.
Don't be an egoist. Be prepared. Be prepared to step into that new world that is there for you to participate in, to enjoy, and to serve. Definitely.
So thank you so much for accepting my invitation, Yves, not just from a professional level, but also from a personal level. Thank you for being what I consider a friend.
Merci, mon ami.
Thank you very much for tuning into The Code, where we delved into very intricate questions here with Yves Fortier, former ambassador of Canada to the United Nations, and many, many other roles. You can follow us on YouTube and Apple Podcast. Thank you very much, and goodbye until next time.